right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Chaleff. This is Ben Chaleff, my brother, right? And we work together at Chaleff and Rogers Architects just down the road a bit in Watermill. And I've been involved with now what's called green and sustainable architecture since the mid-70s, and I've been practicing that consistently all the way through. Many of my friends said that was extremely foolish. We had many decades of rough years, but as you all probably know now, the construction and design world has finally embraced, albeit kicking and screaming, the concept of building green. There's a lot to talk about, and when Carol first approached me or us about doing this kind of program, she said, "Could you do an evening?" And I thought, how can I get across everything I really want to say in one evening? And so I asked if we could have more time, and Carol said, how about 3 evenings? So this is a 3-evening series. We will be here, Ben and I will be here a week from today, and then a week after that. So every Thursday at 7:30. Hopefully we do a good job tonight, and many of you may again return next week, but there's no compulsory, this is not a compulsory program. You attend, when it suits you, and in fact, if you have to get up and leave for whatever reason, then we would understand that as well. All right. I don't know what else to say by way of introduction. Ben, is there anything else you want to add at this point, or should we just get into this?
I think we should start.
Okay. All right. So this is 3 sessions. This first session, just to give you a quick overall, we're going to go back in time to the beginnings of civilization, and we're going to wind up just after World War II and through about up until, 1959. That's with the death of Frank Lloyd Wright, April 1959. And the second session is going to plunge into the issues that brought us to the crisis we have in the world of design and building that we're experiencing now. And for reference, I'm going to be using Naomi Klein's book called This Changes Everything. If you don't know about it, we're going to issue a recommended reading list that accompanies this. We also have an extensive outline for all the sessions, and that will be available from us. If you contact us in our office, we'll be able to email you these various materials. And the last session will be the session that says, this is what we can do and what some of us are already doing, and will be filled with slides about what's the latest, the sexiest, the most brazen and outrageous things that are happening in the world of green architecture. So you're not getting that tonight, is what I'm telling you. But I think it's important to understand the forces that brought us to the place we are now, which is, again, a crisis in terms of energy in our country and as far as the planet goes. And then we can look at how to get out. The first step, of course, is if you find yourself you're in a hole, rule number 1 is stop digging. So we're going to see how we got into that hole, and we're going to stop digging somewhere a week from today, and then 2 weeks from today, we'll try and get out of the hole. So that frames this series for you. And again, as Ben said, we very much want a dialogue and hear feedback and deal with your questions and comments, but we'll request that they come at the end because otherwise, as Ben correctly notes, there'll be acoustic issues here that will overwhelm all of us. So, slide number 1. Yeah, good, it's working fine. All right, here we are at our very beginnings, and we are living in bands, wild bands of wild people. And don't forget that we've discovered now that each of you contains about somewhere between 3 and 7% DNA from Neanderthals, right? So that may explain the problems we're having in the world today, I don't know. But this is the beginning. And we are hunter-gatherers. So we have no domiciles. We lead the nomadic life. And we'll take you around the world in different places. This is in southern France, believe it or not. I think that may be wrong.
I think that might be wrong.
Yeah, got that wrong, all right. That is the desert, right, but it's not in southern France. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it is the Bedouin, so I'm sorry. Right away, we're off on the wrong foot, right? And here we know where we are. This is a painting by George Catlin. Various tents. These are shelters that can easily be portaged. And you could imagine that would be rule number 1. And you just have to make do with the weather. So the shelter is lower down on the ladder of priorities than being able to get food and clothing. That's why we're running around all the time, perpetually looking for food. That's the nomadic life. And here we are. This is Kazakhstan and the yurts, which are far more comfortable. And at some point, we go back into the caves, but we give them a fancy redo. And we're changing the quality of how we relate to these caves because we're experiencing one of the biggest revolutions in the history of mankind, and that is agriculture. And this is profound. The moment we stop having to move around and we settle in one place, all kinds of things happen. First of all, where do we settle? If we're an agricultural society, then we take the best lands for farming and we use them for farming, unlike what we're doing here. We don't build our houses on our farmland, but that's what we've been doing out here. So we build up, that's why we have a lot of hill towns. This I know is in South France because I've been there and I took that picture. Right? This is Galt in the south of France. And it's a beautiful place. And people live compactly, everything is walkable. In terms of energy, in terms of environmental impact, we're really in a safe, good place with this kind of living pattern, settlement pattern, and culture. Right? These are all folk buildings. We don't see any architects. We don't see any professionals at this point. But when we've settled down, then things happen in terms of our society. Instead of being egalitarian, there can be a great division. Again, this is a settlement pattern, same thing. Villages in a working landscape, in the managed landscape, usually farms, but sometimes other, forest or just protected wilderness. But that's the new pattern. This is all because of agriculture, the agricultural revolution. So we have folk buildings that we live in, and what happens when we have agriculture and we start to have some kind of economy, things shift. We suddenly get at least a two-level split, two-tiered split, in that now there are temples, there are palaces, and they go back thousands of years. They go back 6, 7, 5,000, 10,000 years to at the time when we have the agricultural revolution. It doesn't take the same it doesn't take place at exactly the same time all over the world. As you know, it's moving in a spotted fashion, and people are populating the world in a spotted fashion. And here we are in the United States, right? Here's the Anasazi and Adobe. This would be the folk buildings. And then even in Adobe, we get special places, special buildings that verify the and validate the people who are now in a position of authority and are taking disproportionate amounts of wealth from the system, from themselves. And again, this is Canyon de Chelly. Again, these are agrarian societies, and the buildings are simple. They're still folk buildings, but we're seeing the emergence of buildings built by professional designers and builders. Right.
Which might be a mason, which might be a farmer, but nonetheless a professional builder of the time period, the beginnings of architecture.
Right. Now we see here, this is a monastery in China. Yeah. There are a lot of tremendously exciting buildings in this world that we can still go see today. And most of them, I would say, for my money, are not what is being built today, but what existed for hundreds of years, thousands of years previous. Right? This is again now in India, and these are not just holes in the wall, caves as naturally occurring. These are caves that have been reworked by design and construction professionals. Otherwise, you would not have the regularity, the symmetry. Ben thinks this is later. He could be very well be right, but this is a little earlier. Right. All right. All right. And this is India. This is a palace. This is in Jaipur. Jaipur, the pink city. And what you're looking at is the end of the palace, the end elevation. If the palace were a big rectangle, which it sort of is, the short end of the building. So in other words, the building is very much larger than what you see here. But this is the end of the building where the women were. And they lived behind all those screened windows because they were not allowed to go out to the street and be with everybody else. These are the palace women. And they could see out of the windows and see the rest of the city. This is a fort in the neighboring city, Jodhpur. These are clearly built by design professionals, built by professional builders and designed by design professionals. So we have that kind of schism. In some parts of the world where the climate dictates that people still remain nomadic, or issues about resources dictate that people remain nomadic, then we still have just the one building type. And this we put forth as being the greenest building that you can possibly build. And here we're going to talk a little bit about the influences of geography, all the pragmatic issues that drive building form. We have geography, we have climate, we have natural resources, which are particular to the place that you're in. And when we look at all those issues about the natural forces, we would think that we could accurately predict what the building would be like. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these natural forces? Or when we get to the next one, is right. Okay.
So here we're in Peru. In this Peru, which is very geographically varied, but this part is hot and humid over a body of water. I'm not sure if it's a lake or a river, but the point is, it's the place that they want to be, and a house has to get built there, so it's on stilts. That's the obvious answer. It allows for fishing, it allows for transportation, and it allows you to stay dry all at the same time. But it also keeps the building cool, and it allows air to circulate constantly around underneath. And you can see, not just in Peru, but at I think the next one is another place basically in the same climate type. This is the Amazon. Again, the similar type of architecture, all based on climate and typical patterns of living. Again, most people are fishing for their food, and that's why how these villages basically develop on the water for that reason. Related, but also again in the hot and humid climate. Now we're in Florida, and the Seminole Indians, and again to keep the structure cool, it's raised up on stilts. It allows for air circulation. Plus, it keeps the occupants safe from any critters that might be moving about on the ground. And it was the developed indigenous style, and also led itself, worked so well that it also led itself to the next slide, which was much more modern, but nonetheless, now we're in Louisiana, and typical manor house, if you will, or plantation, in that same extremely humid, hot climate. It's lifted up off the ground to allow for air circulation. There's a large veranda to give shade and to allow for outdoor living. The roof, again, shading.
It's high ceilings.
High ceilings, allowing for air circulation, allow the hot air to rise. So this didn't just get built because they looked at the climate and said, well, this would be a great thing to do. They borrowed these from building types that had existed for hundreds of years beforehand. So. Shotgun shacks also here in the homes in Louisiana. Similar, obviously same climate, but a more modest architecture based on resources usually. Again, raised off the ground, but in a linear fashion. You can see the plan at the top of the slide, which allows for the minimal amount of plan, and therefore, there's no extra wasted space in the hallway. All the rooms just connect to each other. But it also primarily, therefore, allows for air circulation front to back of the whole home in the least amount of building possible.
And why do they call it shotgun?
Well, it's the form.
That's right, yeah. Because you could stand with a shotgun and shoot right through, right?
To the other.
Right.
But again, they're close together, but there's enough space that air circulation between the buildings is relatively good. Now we find ourselves in a slightly different climate in the Swiss Alps, where you can see the form is really all relating to snow, shedding the snow, allowing for protection from the snow. These huge overhangs allow you to move about relatively protected underneath. Also verandas, but also the verandas are well underneath the overhangs.
One other point, if I may, the buildings look very big for a house, for a family. Mm-hmm. It's because the barn is in there as well. So the animals, so you wouldn't have to go out and herd the animals. They were right there, and they helped heat the house. Right.
A different kind of communal living.
Right. That's right.
You want to speak about these?
Yeah, these are stone trulli. I think it's pronounced that way, Trulli, found in southern Italy. And it's all a rocky volcanic kind of composition of the soils there. So farming is difficult and building is difficult. In other words, adobe is not a ready a ready option. So stone, what's prevalent everywhere, is what's used for the building material. These buildings go back again with prehistoric roots. These are a little newer, but we're getting close to talking about something else. We can see that the materials determine what the forms are, the climate determines what the forms are, the resources determines what the forms are, the geography determines what the forms are. But at the very top of these buildings are those little caps. Now the cap itself is functional in that it helps keep the water out of what would otherwise be a very difficult joint to make out of stone. But that little ornament on the top has no clear direct functionality that we are aware of. So the issue of culture comes to play, and that's the biggest curveball in the whole business. And we'll spend a little bit of time going over that. All right? But we still have some other building types, just other examples of issues around the world to look at. These are windmills on Greece, and the sails are not set. You can see the forms, and it's clear that these are work buildings, so they're 100% functional. These are your neighbors right here. The one on the left is in Watermill, the one on the right is in East Hampton. Still highly functional building types, again, work buildings, which always tend to be 100% functional, and very little other expressive cultural detail is there. Thank you, Ben. All right. And
except when they become something other than a windmill.
Right. Yeah.
I think this was a converted. I don't think this is still in Southampton. I think it's gone, but it was a working windmill that got converted into a house at some point. So.
All right. These are right here on the Shinnecock Reservation. I encourage you all to go visit the museum, and 3 steps from the museum they have a reproduction village, and such a building is right there. These are oak bark, giant shingles over a frame. You can see the construction system. It's just bent saplings lashed together. Surprisingly sturdy because it's very flexible and incredibly durable.
But relatively quick to build it.
Quick to build.
With enough
right,
people.
Right. Right. Japan. And we have something very different going on here compared to the West. And these images are buildings that, for me, are the seeds and the beginnings of modern architecture, because of this single change in outlook, in perspective on the relationship of man to his environment. In the West, and we'll see this in some other slides just about to come, the environment is considered a hostile place, particularly when the English settlers first came here. They experienced a climate that was far more extreme than the climate they knew in London. London is 10 degrees further north than New York. And in spite of that, because of the Humboldt current, it experiences, again, milder winters and less severe summers. The temperatures don't go as high as we get them. And the humidity is also not what we get here. So aside from the blessings of tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, which we all have in the United States, and I know in Germany, Gordian, right, they think we're crazy because of the earthquakes for living here. Is that right? It's a prevalent understanding. So here in Japan, however, people perceive the environment as the place to be, as being not just friendly but beautiful, and the place that is it's desirable to spend as much of your time in that environment as you possibly can. So we have paper houses. We have houses that are little more than what you need to store a few simple goods, store some supplies, enable you to prepare meals and sleep in relative safety, safe from most animals. And Japan doesn't have giant predator animals, but nonetheless, it's a whole different attitude about your relationship to nature, and therefore the house is entirely different. So we have paper buildings with sliding doors that are open as much as they can be all the time. You're not heating the house, you're heating the person. You sit at a low table with your kimono, which is heavily insulated, enveloping or connecting you to the table, and under the table is a little hibachi that provides heat, a little coal or a little wood, ashes, embers that heat the person, not the space. So you can just have paper house and you can leave the doors open. Right? Right. Another view. The gardens we know are gorgeous. Right. Want to take this, Ben?
You can explain this as well as you do.
Okay. These are wind towers in North Africa. Well, it's Dubai, actually. And in Dubai, and I'm sorry, we don't have enough contrast to see this, but these are wind towers, these are openings, and in the upper diagram we can see one side faces the prevailing wind, and that scoops in the breezes and brings them down. And when you blow into something, the air, you can't blow in unless there's a place for air to escape. So it escapes out the other side, and it's aided by the stack effect due to the temperature differential, that it's cooler on the bottom and warmer on the top. So you have a passive device that encourages a flow of air down and up and out. In the bottom, again, the diagram has wiped this out, there are wells that go down to an underground stream. These are created by the people of Dubai. They tap into the water table, here's the water table, and create this lateral which exits out, right? And they get a flow through here, and then put air holes down to that lateral. And the air comes down and is cooled by the cold water and also comes up into the dwelling. So this is a brilliant use of knowing what your resources are and what you can do with it. And you're driven to this because the climate otherwise it would be pretty unbearable.
It's the first geothermal.
Yes, this is absolutely geothermal system, right? And that's what it looks like as part of a whole building. This is a wood model of a Greek temple, and I couldn't find what I was looking for, which was what is the precursor to the temple. It just didn't spring fully blown and completely developed from nowhere. And I really couldn't find that. But architectural historians tell me that the stone temple, its final form, and again, you can see the final form here, but this again is in wood because they tell me that what is built in stone as a temple is taken from the arrangement of timbers from a wood building. And now I hear that some people are thinking that this is absolutely what the story is, but I'm really not so sure because at about the same time across the Mediterranean, there's the stone building, the same arrangement of columns and lintels and so forth. The Egyptians were also building these buildings out of stone. And I think the precursor lies not in a wooden primitive, quote, primitive prototype, but I think from what I understand about the relationship of Greece and Rome to Egypt lies in the work that was done by the Egyptians in creating their buildings, originally of stone, hardly any wood there. So I think that's what happened. So again, there's cross-cultural effect going on between peoples who live directly adjacent or not so far away. And again, everybody's not flying in airplanes, but using boats for transportation, water for transportation. And this is interesting. This is a quote from Socrates. Now in houses with the south aspect, the sun's rays penetrate into the porticos in winter, but in the summer, the path of the sun is right over our heads and above the roof, so that there is shade. If, then, this is the best arrangement, we should build the south side loftier to get the winter sun, and the north side lower to keep out the winter winds. And Ben is going to elaborate on this right now.
Well, the next slide is a little bit better, but the point is that Earth, just like most of the rest of the planets actually, which we didn't realize that until we found this, is not plumb, as it were, on its axis. It's actually got an angle of 23.5 degrees that it's off.
Vertical.
And that is the whole reason why we have seasons, which you can see in the next slide here, which I think most of you know, especially living here in the Northeast, that we do get more seasons than some of the rest of the parts of the world. But that 23.5 degrees means that during a year, in the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the Sun, that the northern hemisphere is closer and getting more direct rays from the sun in the summer, in our summertime, and the southern hemisphere therefore is in the opposite season, the opposite end of the calendar for their summer, and this is the whole reason why we have seasons on our planet, which some of the other planets, the angle is not nearly as extreme, so who knows what that means, but
Yeah.
I'm going to go to the next.
Yeah, but I just want to go back for a second and say that what he doesn't say here is that what happens in the summer. He's talking only about the winter. And that overhang that he's talking about can be designed such so that in the summer, the sun is cut and doesn't come into the space. And it turns out that the angle between the winter solstice down here is 26 degrees at our latitude, and the summer solstice at noon on June 21st is at 73 degrees. The difference between them is a constant 47 degrees, depending on what latitude you live on the Earth. But it's a constant 47 degrees, reflecting the fact that the Earth is tilted on its axis at half that, 23.5 times 2 is 47. So that geometry enables us to create buildings with a fixed overhang. The building doesn't move, the planet moves, and in doing so, the sun can come all the way in the winter, and it can be totally blocked out in the summer without having any machine, any device, any active moving part of the building just calculating the overhang correctly and orienting the building, its major aperture, which should be the south in our climate here, so that most of your windows appear on the south. And this is the heart of passive solar. It costs us nothing to institute into our buildings, and we have it by virtue of a fluke of the arrangement of the tilt of the Earth. And as Ben said, you can see there are some planets. What is this one? Uranus?
Which is
Yeah, whoops, went too far here.
almost completely on its side.
Yeah, almost, the other way, and the same with, what is this?
Pluto.
Pluto, thank you. So we could live on Mars. There's seasons on Mars. There are seasons on Neptune. But otherwise, Mercury is, 1/10 of a degree off plumb.
Right.
So by a fluke, our distance to the sun and our tilt, we have what we have. And to not use that is really ridiculous at best and horrendous and criminal at worst. Okay? All right. So these are the elements that the pragmatic parts of the formula that shape our buildings and that we should heed when we're looking for input about what will our building be like. If we don't pay attention to these basic issues, then we're not going to get an optimum building in terms of low energy use and in terms of being pleasant and comfortable to live in. And here's our lowest example.
Right, and so this goes right to what Socrates was referring to, really, in that, but this was really developed here in the New World. This was not, the materials were what the English settlers were familiar with, but the form developed really newly when they arrived here. Not the first day, but over the years. And this is probably more like 1680. I mean, this was not the first. This was Jamestown. They were not building salt boxes, but the salt box and the whole, I think the name actually comes from
A cracker box.
right. But it's the whole concept that Socrates outlined, which is southern side. They would always be facing south with the high wall to the south to allow for more solar exposure, and the north side would slope. Although the roof would slope all the way down, and you would have 1 story's worth of wall exposed to the north winds, and you would have a lot more roof exposed to the north winds. You would have this part was not new, but you would have this, a large stone hearth at the center of the house. It would provide for the heat and the cooking, and it would be on multiple floors usually. But the point is that once that mass got hot, it kept the whole house warm. But in addition, there was insulation. They would often use eelgrass actually out here, stuffed into the walls. So there was pretty good insulation going on in 1660, 1670 out here. Anything else about the plan that we wanted to mention? I don't think so.
No. Right. So here we have a building form that responds 100% to climate, to resources, materials, resources, and we get this optimum efficient building. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, says, "I'm tired of being a second-class act compared to France and England. What are we going to do about it? We're going to be the new Greece." So he starts the Greek revival period and throws out the baby with the bathwater. These buildings face every which way, and Sag Harbor is a great a collection of Greek revival buildings and buildings from other periods as well, but Greek revival. And you can see there's The orientation is however the street is. It always faces the street. Whereas if you go to East Hampton on the Mulford Farm and the Home Sweet Home there, those salt boxes, you can see the irregular roof line, the asymmetrical roof line. You're looking at the gable end of the building facing the main street because the building itself has its two-story wall facing south. So all of that went away. Chimneys went on the ends of the building instead of in the center. Masonry is a horrendous insulator. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a conductor. So you don't want that on an outside wall, but nonetheless, this is what happens. Now, if you go down Baltimore or further south, and if you take this portico off here, you will have a rectangular building with chimneys on the end. That's the prototype for buildings in that climate and further south when you're trying to cool. And the buildings are usually one room deep for the maximum ventilation. But here, no, it's all about culture. It's all about what is up here, and it takes precedence over all the other pragmatic issues. Now we go to another place where we see people where culture influences what people are doing. These are the sites for utopian and religious communities in the United States on or around 1840. 1840 was the height of the amount of population that we had living in communities like this. In fact, 10% of the people living in the United States were living in intentional communities, right? Many of them were religious, but most were not. And you can see we had our friends from England, Mr. Owen, come over and cast seeds out, and Fourier from France cast seeds out. There are many such communities. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. This is in New York, Oneida, upstate, and for a source of income, they made silverware. In fact, this was the largest silverware factory in the United States at the time. And this place is right here on Long Island. This was Modern Times, which was a branch off of New Harmony and the Alfred Noyes from the Boston community. And there was a whole issue. There were people experimenting in free love or different kinds of family, let's just say different kinds of family structures and arrangements, right? This was a very radical time in the history of the United States culturally, and these places reflected that. The building itself, if you look very carefully at it, you'll see is not rectangular. There's a front piece, but the section in the back is octagonal. And that building is no longer extant. This is, I believe, the sole remaining building from the Modern Times community at Brentwood, Long Island, and this was the home of Mr. Dame. And that's there still today, right? And these, oops, going the wrong way. These octagonal buildings were the idea of Mr. Orson Squire Fowler, who was very active in the New York metropolitan area and up and down the Hudson Valley, and promoted hexagonal buildings because they enclosed the most amount of square footage in terms of floor plan with the least amount of surface area. He acknowledged that a round building would have been more efficient yet, but as tipping his hat to the practical issues of building and living with round walls, he settled on an octagonal plan. Hundreds of these units are built all around the United States. There's one in San Francisco and many, many, many up and down the Hudson Valley. This was one of perhaps the most famous. This is at Irvington on Hudson. Right. So we have a cultural overlay to pragmatism in terms of how do we build a shelter that's going to be efficient in terms of the use of our time, resources, materials, not only to build, but to live in. And now we start with, I think on schedule, we start with the Industrial Revolution. And I would credit this building as being the first building of the Industrial Revolution. There's a tremendous story about this building. This building, first of all, was the great exhibition hall built by England, by the government of England, for what is acknowledged to be now the first World's Fair in 1851. And the government issued an RFP to architects in the region saying, please send us your ideas, but keep in mind there is a budget, and keep in mind we have to get this done on time, and let's see what you can come up with. And they examined all, I think there were over 100 submittals, and the judges felt that not a single one would come in on time and on budget. So there they are after the submission deadline, and they're stuck, and the calendar is clicking away. The time for when this would open was set in stone, and they told their buddies in the rest of Europe who all would participate, don't worry, we're going to have a nice building for you on January, whatever it was, in 1851. And so they're in a corner. A man named Joseph Paxton, who was a gardener primarily and a greenhouse designer secondarily, goes to the building committee and says, I'm going to save your collective tuchuses. And he comes up with an idea where he will, this is the floor plan, it's 1,851 feet long. We understand why, right? And it's a simple section because the design was the first mass-produced building. All of these cast iron elements are repetitive elements, so there are molds and jigs that can be used to create the whole building. And in fact, he even foresaw and understood the necessity to jig the actual erection of the building and the assembly of the building. He designed the building, simple machines that fit exactly onto the building. The design of the building and its process of building it were designed at the same time. So that the acres of glass that were used, all in repetitive size, same size pieces, were stacked onto these rolling carts, and they would run along in the gutter valleys. And the workman would lay a piece down, seal it in, move on, do the next one. He designed and built the building in 6 months and made the deadline on time and budget. And the building was an enormous success. It was up for many years, and at the end of the fair, it got disassembled and reassembled on another location, and stood for decades. And I think at one point then there was a fire that destroyed the building ultimately. But in terms of conceiving a building where the industrial world was now moving to the idea of interchangeable, exactly the same parts. That's what we have from Eli Whitney and the assembly of guns for the Civil War. That idea was born there and carried now into the world of building design. Right? So we have the industrial building age. Then I need to show you this, okay? You would say that this is the antithesis of rational design. This is absolutely whimsical. This is like Mickey Mouse did it, or somebody who was on some kind of drug abuse regimen, and I don't know if you recognize who it is, but I'm telling you at the bottom, it's Antonio Gaudí in Spain. And the work looks again to be, without any kind of rationale, that the shapes and the forms, there's no symmetry, there's no regularity, so it would appear, right? And my wife and I went to see these buildings, and in particular the one on the screen in front of you. This is the one he's very well known for, the most famous building. This is right in Barcelona, at the top of the Ramblas. This is the Sagrada Familia, which is still under construction, and it's going on 100 years, or over 100 years. and they don't know when it'll be done, but they're making great strides, right? And it is a fantastic, incredible building. The same principles that he used for this building, he used in all his buildings. So we'll go back to the Palace Güell, the crypt, right, Güell. There was supposed to be a church on top of this. This is like the basement of a church that never happened. So there were going to be terrific loads. And these are basalt, solid pieces of basalt for columns. And the structure consists largely in terms of brickwork that in many cases is 1 withe thick. A withe is the thickness of a brick. If it's 3 5/8 or 4 1/4, whatever it is, it's 1 brick thick. And how could he do this? Why does this work? And the answer is this, that he performed very accurate structural calculations for all his work. He told us, who is he? My wife and I are sitting, we go through the building, there's nobody there. This is about 30 miles north of Barcelona. We've taken a bus to see it. And it's a beautiful day. We're there at about 11:15, 11:30. And we're sitting outside in the park surrounding, looking back at the building. And we see a man very well dressed in a white suit, an elderly fellow, walking around, and he's looking at us. And I know I can't help but look like an American tourist. I don't know if there was any trouble because of it or not, but he comes and he's getting closer and closer to us, and finally he comes right up to us. And he says, "Let me introduce myself. I see that you like and follow the work of Antonio Gaudí." He says, "I am the mayor of this little village," which turned out, going back to our previous slides, was a village, it was a cooperative, workers' cooperative village that was built from scratch. And he says, "I was not always the mayor. I'm here now and I'm dressed in my nice suit because there's going to be a wedding here at noon. But nobody's here yet, so we are here, just the 3 of us." He said, "I was not always a mayor. In fact, when I was younger, I worked hard. I worked like everybody else, and I was a mason tender. And I would carry brick and water and so forth for the masons." And he said, "I worked on this building in Barcelona. This is the Park Güell. There are a lot of buildings, Guell, that Gaudí built because he was a patron of Gaudí's and sponsored him. And this park, with its magnificent a bench made of broken tile, sculptural tile, it's just gorgeous. And this is the edge. This is an inset drawing of this bench all along here. And this is a big plaza, this park, and the bench at the end. And at the bottom, holding this up, are columns. And it's not a distortion by the photographer. These outer columns are actually leaning, right? As we can see in this photograph here, right? These are not parallel. The columns are leaning. So this mayor tells us the story that he was very proud to work under Señor Gaudí, and when he was there one day working as the mason, and Señor Gaudí is there, he sees a man come up to Mr. Gaudí. Now, my wife was a language major, and she knew Spanish well. I was just speaking the language of the hands, and the mayor is speaking in Spanish, but he confers with Jane, and they agree to a word that was descriptive of this fellow who comes up to him. And they said he was a dandy. In other words, he was a very shallow character, a lot of flash, and very little substance. And he had a cane, and he had a woman on each arm, thank you very much. And he's strutting around, and he comes up to Señor Gaudí, and he's very haughty and totally disrespectful of the stature that this man has earned over decades of working very hard. And he says, "Tell us, Señor Gaudí, please, why are your columns leaning?" And he's like this on his cane, you know, like our friend Charlie, you know. And Senor Gaudi doesn't say anything at first. He just takes his leg and he kicks the cane out, and the fellow goes sprawling on the ground, and he says, "That is why my columns are leaning," which is exactly correct, because if we come, I skipped it. Yeah, here it is. You know, this is all about what we call vectors. If you have a force and an angle, you can break it down into two forces, a vertical and a horizontal component in this case, and those forces, you know, represent what's going on here. So these columns, the angled columns, are vectors based on his calculations of the vertical and horizontal thrust, because these columns are at the edge of the building. In the center, they're all plumb. These are two different photographs. In the center, the columns are perfectly plumb. When you get to the outside, there is a horizontal component, and therefore you get a vector force, and the columns are sloping. And that's what happens when you're resting on the cane. The same thing. So it was a perfect analogy, description, and of course his way to, you know, say to this guy, "You don't know anything, get the hell out of here." So that was the story about Gaudi. And then the other part is, how does he do these one-wide ribs? Masonry does not work in bending. It works great in compression. You can squeeze it, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. But it's not like wood. Wood can take bending. We have bows, you know, that take bending and they come back to their original shape. Masonry doesn't do that. And if you build a tall column out of masonry, if you're not perfectly aligned, if the column is not perfectly aligned with the compressive force on top, if that force is actually a vector, if it's a slight angle, then you're going to induce some bending into the column, and the column will bend and fail, not by compression, but it will fail by bending. And that's true with all the masonry in the buildings. So what Gaudi would do is very carefully calculate the shape of the forces and have the building material follow those shapes. And he did that by building the buildings. If these are all pure compression buildings that he was looking to do, he made pure tension models by taking chains, in some cases, or string with little sandbags attached to them with the calculated weight, the modeled weight of the building. And those chains would form catenaries and parabolas, and would give him the shape. If he turned it upside down again, that would be pure compression, because you're just flipping the loads and working and going from tension to compression. And that's where all these shapes come from. And if I go back a little further here to this slide, how do we get these curvature, these curved surfaces? And their curve, again, is computed as part of a parabolic curve to resist the loads on it without having any bending. And he tells you, Gaudi tells you, if you're willing to look, these are the lines in the decorative work of the forms, which are made with straight members. So it's very economical to say this must be very expensive to build, because you have to build all these curved forms to hold up the masonry until the mortar sets. And the answer is no. He would build them with straight, you see this diagonal here? He would build them with these straight boards, and these boards would each one would move a little bit, and you get the parabolic shape with the formwork. And that's what he's even telling you, so that you can read the building and understand what's going on. And here again, these parabolic arches. So the guy was an absolute genius, and he was able to be incredibly expressive and at the same time 100% rational. You know? So now we're coming to our end, and we're just about right there. Most of you, I think, would know this building as the Roby House by Frank Lloyd Wright. This was done, I think, 1906. And the overhangs are just fantastic. And the amount of glass is fantastic. He's going from brick, he has compression, but Wright was the big proponent of the cantilever, you know. And that cantilever, which is found in nature, right in all the trees, everywhere, is able to work, and with big expanses of glass, is able to work because he has new resources in his toolbox, which are steel and big pieces of glass. And in that soffit are these two steel beams that enable that cantilever to work. The steel beams are in here, and they go out and continue past the building line and catch that roof if it goes out, I think, close to 30 feet. You know, it's just tremendous. So this is 1906. If you walk up 3 or 4 blocks from the location of the Roby House, oh, I missed this. I have them all in the wrong order then, Ben. All right. This is the solar hemicycle. Why don't you take this building?
Okay.
All right.
This is not in Chicago,
Right.
but the
It's in
it's
Wisconsin.
It's in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Which Wright called the solar hemicycle house. This is actually the entrance, which is relatively inconspicuous. I'm not sure how it relates to the street actually, but I think it's relatively private anyway. But if you go to the next slide, see that
You come through here. You're coming
right.
in here.
So you enter into this
Courtyard.
courtyard, thank you, facing south, and as one, I forget the actual plan, the plan's on the next page, I think it shows that. No, I guess it's not.
No. No.
But the point is that through the day, you will pass, the sun will, as the sun rises in the morning and it gets to be noon and passes to noon to the afternoon, the sun's rays will start, thank you, on the left side, assuming it's facing south. And so basically the house itself is tracing, and the occupants are usually tracing the path of the sun throughout the day. And he called that the solar hemicycle, in that you are always facing due south wherever you might be in the house, assuming you have the opportunity to face south throughout the day in the entire plan.
The building is 1 room deep.
Right.
The whole lower floor is one giant curved living dining kitchen, and then there's a 2nd floor balcony over here, balcony with bedrooms to the north, but they enjoy the same view as the 2-story glass wall. And there is an overhang that is calculated again to admit the full rays of the winter sunlight, but when the sun is up here in the summer, a 47-degree difference, then there is no sun coming into the space. Right. It also
uses passive cooling. It actually took the excavated fill from the house and, created further a basin, and then built it up on the north side of the house to create a berm and insulate the north wall, but also to aid in the convective currents and to keep the house cool in the summertime.
All right. That's the interior shot. And again, now if you go back to the Roby House and walk a few blocks from the Roby House, you will find the maximum expression of large sheets of commercially available glass at a relatively good, fair price, and big pieces of steel. You know, that's different than cast iron in its ability to span, take bending stresses. Cast iron is brittle and doesn't bend very well at all. So you have to watch out when you use it as a beam. As a column, you can do okay. So this is the Crown Hall on the Illinois Institute of Technology campus by Mies van der Rohe. And there's another view of it from the outside. The building essentially has these big, what I would call bents, giant trusses at these intervals. I don't know how long that is, maybe 80 feet or something on center. And then the roof members are hung from them and span between. So this is the plan and the building, and here's a detailed section. This is the big truss over the top, and the roof members are hung from that. These are the columns. He's expressing the columns and the glazing in between, right? Taking wind loads. And there we are for discussion. Okay.
Well, did anyone save a question, or can they come up with one now? Yes.
So not that long ago, buildings were typically built from all local materials. Here on the East End today, are there local materials that would make sense to build with?
There are some, I don't know how available they are anymore. They're becoming less and less usable, but one that is used quite a bit is the sand that we have. The quartz sand that we have is actually perfect in concrete, and so in lots of parts of the country, concrete is cost prohibitive and not the go-to for foundations, for example. And there's many parts of the country that use wood framing foundations. But because of our sand, it actually means that the cost of concrete in our region on Long Island is relatively low compared to the rest of the country. So it enables that. Any other materials?
Well, historically, Long Island was clear-cut 4 times. It was the home of beautiful big white pine. And the king, George III, marked those as belonging to the king because he was building ships and building empires, and he needed that wood. So it served for that purpose. And in fact, if you were a patriot before the war for independence started, you would have in your salt box, behind the front door on the wall, you would have the biggest board you could get. The king sent his army around, and with an axe, he would blaze a mark called the broad axe. It was 3 blaze strokes that made a broad arrow marks, those 3 marks on the tree indicating that the tree belonged to King George. So you'd go out and you'd cut one of those down, right? And you'd take the biggest board out of the center of it, and you'd mount it on the wall, and over 24 inches, right? And you'd mount it on the wall, a big piece of it on the wall, so that when the king's soldiers came in and they opened the door, the board was behind the door, right? And they didn't see it. And but all your friends who came in would know you to be a patriot rather than a Tory, because once you're in and you shut the door, there's the board and everybody can see what's going on. So that was early use of timber, was really for shipbuilding and some work for homes. We did a house in Sagaponack. We didn't build the house. It was a job to redo the house. The house was on a map dated, and the map was dated 1640. So it was a timber frame house. And we go in to do this house, and we rip it back to the frame. And under the front door, the sill plate, and it was properly oriented, the house faced south. So that east-west big sill plate was about 17 inches deep and about, I think it was maybe 8 or 9 inches wide. And of course it had mortises cut in it for stud work, and it had mortises cut in the side for joist. But in addition to that, it had regular mortises on both sides at a regular distance up and down its whole length of over 40 feet. So what is this timber? Any guesses? Well, aside from the wood, why would it have mortises on the outside There were mortises cut for the joists on the inside, but pairs of additional mortises cut down its length. 40. It was a ship's keel. So it was reused timber. 1640. These big timbers, imagine how much work it was to square and build with wood when you don't have a table saw. The circular saw blade was invented in 1840 by a Shaker woman, a Shakerist woman, and in a dream. Came to her in a dream. Okay, you know, I don't know what she was smoking, but anyway. So up until then, you had pit saws, you know, a straight blade, a guy in a trench and a guy on top. You didn't want to be the guy in the trench, but you're sawing. And if you go and look at timbers in an old timber frame building, if you see the saw marks that are straight up and down, you might very well be in a building that was built before 1840. And that's a way you can tell. If you see those arcs, saw marks from an arc, then you know that timber was pushed through a saw blade, a circular saw blade, and then the building is after 1840. But before that, before the pit saw, you're there with an adze, and you're squaring these timbers. So the amount of human labor investment was enormous. So resources, we've had shortages of materials of different kinds going all the way back hundreds of years. And again, clear-cutting Long Island. So what do we build with today, to get back to your question on the end of Long Island? We experimented briefly 20 years ago, close to 20, 15, 18 years ago, when we first started this building that we just finished, the Tuckahoe, the Shinnecock School, with compressed earth block. And we had the manufacturer of the machine that made the block. Our approach to the Shinnecocks was, here's the material free, right? The machine will compress the earth and give us a material that far exceeds the strength required by the job. So it's a safe, good material. It's fireproof, it's rot-proof. It has thermal capacitance. When the sun comes in, it will store the extra heat, and at night it will radiate the heat back out. So a perfectly good material, right? And we can design houses with it. We can do retaining walls. We can do pavers for flooring. Terrific material. Let's build with this. No, I don't think so, Bill. It doesn't seem. We want the same kind of building that you white guys build with, you know. And this is a very different picture. Just to show you again how much culture affects what we do. Here was a really fine proposal that would also give employment to people. They would have a skill and that was marketable. They could go around to the rest of us and say, you want a beautiful garden wall? We build the wall out of this beautiful compressed earth. And when finally, after decades, the roots hold up the earth that you have, the roots of the plant material, this sort of gently erodes down and becomes a smooth shape and finally goes away to nothing, and then the roots are doing all the work. So it's a very interesting thing to work. And it's certified green because we are Native Americans and we're using the earth. I mean, what's greener? Just maybe the igloo is greener, but other than that. So we had this whole plan of housing and employment and build the school. No, we want the same kind of building that you guys build for yourselves. Now, jump ahead 18 years. We just finished building a school for the Shinnecocks. The Shinnecocks, we used structural insulated panels for that building. That building is fine, everybody's happy. I also work with the museum people, and the museum, you know, is that big log building on the highway, on Montauk Highway. They're going to expand that sometime in the future. It could be, again, decades. And they are now entertaining using the compressed earth block. Why is that? Because the Shinnecocks are now a federally recognized nation, which they were not up until, when did this happen? 4
years ago.
4 years ago, right? The kids on the reservation, I would see, there were all kinds of, there were wars in the high school between the black community, the Native American community, and the white community. It was like 3 different gangs. The Native Americans, the kids don't do that anymore. They now will sometimes wear their regalia into the village. These kids, since they are now federally recognized, the whole dynamic in the Shinnecock Reservation has changed 180 degrees, just like Gowdy's flip from compression to tension. They are very proud of who they are. The museum is actively supported by the full tribe. It's well-staffed. The kids are all learning all the crafts and all the trades. Now, it's a wonderful thing to see. They're very proud of who they are. Now, with this resurgence of pride in their history, pressed earth block, knowing that it has ties to other indigenous peoples in time and space, it becomes a viable alternative for them. So it's a great question because we get to tell the story about how all these things relate in terms of what materials, you know, what is there and what nature provides and what culture does, your way of thinking. We have a problem about getting materials. If you are going for a LEED certified building, which means leadership in energy and environmental design, and there's a rating system of how you do this, you have to use materials that come from within 500 miles of your site. And I think a really excellent building, all the materials should come from a lot closer than 500 miles. But currently, that's what we're doing. When you go to the lumber yard, the lumber that you buy here comes from 3,000 miles away. It's Douglas fir that comes from the opposite coast. The opposite coast, the west coast.
Northwest usually,
right,
or
northwest
Canada.
or Canada,
A lot of our plywood
right?
comes from Canada.
So we don't have really good options. All the materials that we used to have brickyards on Long Island. We have clay that's natural to this area. This is a moraine. This is the outfall of the last glacier. That's what Long Island is. And we know about errant boulders. Occasionally you'll see these boulders that come up from excavations, big, and are they sharp-edged? The boulders? No, they're rounded and they're smooth because they were pushed by the glacier, right, to get where they are. So these boulders we have. There are also balls of solid clay that clay came from who knows where, somewhere north of here, right, and were part of, occasionally, just like the errant boulders, there are errant globs of clay. We have lots of it. There were many brick factories and kilns. That's right, Brick Kiln Road. Brick Kiln Road. That's right. That's right. And the names linger. Again, culture, which in some ways is the most ethereal of all material or substances, right? So ethereal, and yet it can have a life that is far greater than any piece of steel or rock or brick. So Brick Kiln Road is right up the road here. So we could go back and do that again. And as Ben correctly says, the only thing we don't get gouged for in terms of living out here, in terms of price, is concrete, because it is 90% of when you buy concrete, 90% is sand. And that's right here. Good question, Francesca. There is a difference between the climate where those cooling towers are and our climate, and that difference is water. Humidity. Humidity. It's not just the access they have to the groundwater. We have access to groundwater too. It's humidity. And if we don't, those really won't work for us because they won't dehumidify. The discomfort that we experience when it gets really hot here is all due to the humidity. You can be in a very hot place if it's dry and be pretty comfortable. And we have that in the West, right? There are guys who go skiing with just in a t-shirt or nothing in the winter because the insolation, the amount of energy from the sun is so tremendous, and it's dry. They don't have, so it's also comfortable in the winter as well. So we can't do that, but we can build with more masonry. Masonry really helps. When we have a quote, normal building, what we think of as a normal building, mostly out of wood, and it's maybe well insulated, when the sun comes in, and we get that place up to temperature, there's nothing, there are no materials that have any capacitance. Capacitance is the ability of material to hold heat energy. Water has a capacitance of 1. Every other material we know is slightly less than that, 0.9, 0.8, 0.62, whatever it is. Concrete, dense materials have capacitance. Fluffy materials, insulators, wood fibers, they have no capacitance. When you put capacitance in your building, you do peak shaving. Your building will not cycle to here it's 3 o'clock, 2:30, the hottest time of the day, the building, your air conditioning is working like mad, the building's getting a big load then. If you have capacitance, that extra heat energy goes into the material, and then at night radiates back. So you don't get the low and you don't get the high. Your peak shaving and your valley filling, So your equipment can be sized to have smaller capacitance. Instead of having to deal with the difference in temperature so much, now you're dealing with the difference in temperature so much. So your equipment can be smaller, your comfort goes up, your energy use goes down. So using more masonry materials, right? It's a motorcycle, I guess, a lawnmower. Anyway, using materials with greater capacitance would work well.
So would
Rammed earth would be a great example. In the latest dawning of the solar age, which occurred in the 70s as with the coming of the oil crisis back then, there were passive solar houses that were done with big tanks, clear tubes of water, right? So by using our imaginations and using the materials that we do have, we could do an awful lot better. But we have to want to, and we have to accept the changes that these materials force on us. We can't build with masonry and have it look like shingles. And yet everybody who comes out here and builds a house says, I want a shingle-style house. So we have big cultural problems. And that's true with the green movement in general. We have to change our behavior in order to really be effective and live the green life, rather than try and buy our way out of it or use widgets and gadgets and so forth. It really comes down to us. As we saw in all the earlier civilizations, they didn't have an energy crisis or a pollution crisis or a CO2, a greenhouse gas crisis. That's brought to us courtesy of the industrial age, which we've now magnified by I don't know what factor, to really burn tremendous amounts of energy. But I just want to leave you with this to really emphasize, again, the size of the problem being mostly cultural. In Germany, France, England, Scandinavia, Japan, highly developed countries, many could argue, and properly so, that those countries, the people in those countries actually enjoy a higher standard of living than we do, depending on what metrics you use. If you use the metrics that I like, do they have proper health care? Do they have free education? Is everybody guaranteed a job? Is everybody guaranteed a residence? They are miles ahead of us. If you use the metrics about just gross product income, thanks, per capita, then you could have some debate about it. But nonetheless, those countries per capita use 1/3 the amount of energy that we do. So having a lot of money to buy all this stuff has nothing to do with how energy efficient We are. And it has nothing to do, it's not a quality of life issue. You can enjoy a high quality of life, and just off the face of it, by looking at that current statistic, we could knock off 2/3 the amount of energy that we're currently using per capita and enjoy a high quality of life equal to those that people like my friend Gordy in Germany enjoy. And we'd save a bundle, and we could make a big dent on where we're running amok with all our carbon releases, greenhouse gas releases. Yes.
I noticed that, yeah.
One is what people ask for and what they want. They want what they know.
And they want what their neighbor has.
And they want what their neighbor has, and they're afraid to do something different, number one. Number two is this. We are in a competitive capitalist free market economy. The way a builder has to give you a price is he has to guess at what that building will cost, because each one is custom, each one is different, each one is unique. So he has to guess what that building will cost. He can tally the cost of the materials, he knows what that is, but when it comes to the labor component, which is more than 50% of the cost, now it's about 60% or more out here, the cost, and it's a lot of money, he's guessing. Will it take 3 man-hours to hang that door or 2 man-hours? And am I going to use my most expensive, best educated, and best skilled, my most skillful guy, which I'm paying more, or can I assign it to guys who don't have quite the amount of skill? Then it'll cost me less per hour, but maybe it'll take them longer. So he goes through the plans, and he looks at every single part of the building, and he has to guess at what the labor component is. After doing 100 of them, or even 20 of them, he has a pretty good idea. He doesn't know exactly, but he has a pretty good idea. If I suddenly say to him, no, wait a second, you're not going to use a hammer and nails. We're going to do it out of this material with this other technology. What is he? He doesn't know. So he adds a whole bundle to the price and says, that technology is not affordable. All right. We see very little steel. The one thing in favor of, there are a couple of things in favor of wood. Environmentally, wood is supposedly a renewable resource. But like any other, quote, renewable resource, if we demand it at a rate that exceeds the rate at which it renews itself, then it's not a renewable resource. So we have to watch out for that. But it also is an excellent insulator. And you're talking about the outside walls of the building. But there are other materials and other technologies that we use and other people use all the time that would be great substitutes for wood. In fact, they would surpass in performance. Now that we're building our buildings tighter, what's becoming a big problem, I'm sure you know, is mold and mildew. Mold and mildew. Why do we have mold and mildew problems? Because moisture, warm, moist air that we have, is going into the cavities in the walls and condensing. We're getting that water in the building, the fabric of the building. And what mold and mildew need is oxygen, food, and moisture. So the food is the building material, the oxygen is everywhere, right? And then we add the moisture, and bingo, we have mold and mildew. The spores are everywhere all the time. They will grow where they have those 3 things. So cavity walls are inherently a problematic design solution because they allow for a place for moisture to condense and to exist. So we try and build without having cavities in the walls. It's one example. We really try and look at this in a very analytic way, but we also try and respond to cultural issues as well. Gordon. Well, I'll give you a demonstration of that right now. Everybody, please, on the count of 3, without poking your neighbor in the eye, point to where south is. On the count of 1, 2, 3. Okay, you're dead, right? You're dead, that's right, right? These people are good, it's that way, it's south, right? So we all learn this. In fact, every day, every waking day, you know where the sun is, right? You learn these things. But we don't. We don't really learn it. The kids in the schools, first of all, I don't know that they really learn anything. They memorize, they pass the test, and then they get kicked on and they keep going. And I don't think kids, it's not there are no visceral experiences that really enable kids to hold on to the information. Why don't we take them outside? And well, when I lecture in the schools, at the beginning of the lecture, we put a little black rock on the windowsill, and a little white rock on the windowsill. And I can say it all I want, but there's nothing like picking up that rock. How I got into solar energy. I was in Spain with my wife, and somebody said, "Oh, Bill, you'll be interested to meet this guy. He's a retired English boilermaker, and he made you've heard this story, a solar collector that heats his hot water." Well, he's in Spain, there's all the sun, it's great. So we go to meet him, and standing right there out in his yard is this big old extra boiler tank, some steel thing, no insulation around it, because he's in Spain, didn't need much insulation. So I go over, and the guy yells at me a little too late. He's yelling, "Don't," and I'm gonna go, and I touch that thing, and I burn my fingers. So I really learned. I really learned how that works. I think that's what's going on, Gordy, and we've also now narrowed, we don't deal with the arts, we don't have kids. The arts is the one opportunity where kids in the schools are creative. Otherwise, it's all incoming. There's no synthesis, there's no integration, there's no opportunity to express, in terms of the material world. Yes, you can write a poem, maybe, you can do that. But in other ways, the kids are divorced from the material world, increasingly so. Where they're focused on their little... Yes, that's true. But I think it was a misapplication. Instead of using it to do work that we really couldn't do, let's take this half-inch steel plate and shape it, So you have to have a big press to do that. You can have guys with hammers all day long hitting this thing. They're not going to get anywhere. So in order to make an ocean liner, for example, you have to shape these things. But you don't need it to have it. We don't need electric toothbrushes. There are many things where I think we've misapplied the energy. And in fact, one of the very founding principles of proper energy use is load matching, right? We should use the energy form and the best and the amount of energy we need to exactly offset whatever the demand is. And that would be the most efficient way to resolve the demand. Well, the first principle is get the demand down, right? Lower the demands. But then when you've done it best as you can, you still have a certain demand, you load match. So now we are designing electric motors, for example, that have variable frequency, drives, and their output is variable, and it varies in proportion as required to what the load is. So that's better use of energy. Our engineers are doing better there. But in terms of how we learn as a culture and a society, let's go back to the Japanese house. A few older diehards are living, the last generations are living in the paper houses, right? Even the Japanese who are so in love and so close to and have a better understanding of nature than we will ever have, they're heating their homes now, right? So these cultural norms shift. In the 50s, the average house in the United States, the average unit house was under 1,500 square feet. It's now over 2,500 square feet. I grew up in a house, there was 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, not a bath and a half, 1 bathroom. In the affordable housing standards now by the federal government, that doesn't cut the mustard anymore. You can't, even those much less fortunate than ourselves, we have a bar that we're raising about what is a standard that we live with. So these things are constantly drifting up. And we have to address it. I think at the bottom it's really a cultural problem, a political problem, an economic problem. It is anything but a technological problem. It's not a technological problem at all.
Building homes.
Well, recyclability. But I'd like to jump, that's a one-word answer, I hope it's okay, but I'd like to jump into a parallel world, and that is the world of food, right? And where we have in this country, 50% of all the food we grow is wasted. But the issue of how do we learn healthy, how do we change our patterns, how do we get off McDonald's, a society that's living on McDonald's, and move it in the other direction? And the slow food movement started in Italy. And it's a cultural shift. It's something we have to have. It's a matter of education. That's why this institution is so important. Thank you, Carol. You know, but it's really we have to work on these other levels. We can't solve a technological problem with a cultural solution, and we can't solve a cultural problem with a technological solution.
But it just seems in buildings there's so much waste.
Oh, there is.
In building sites. And I just wonder if there is a way to build that is zero waste.
Well, I don't know that the level be zero, but I'll tell you this. Mother Nature is the best example. There's no waste really in Mother Nature. And then we have the issue of recycling. Well, let's look at that first very, very carefully. What we mostly do is we don't recycle, we downcycle. When I'm done with this paper, this is going to wind up, and this is, in the office we splurge. We buy very high quality paper, a real nice white, heavy grade paper, nice finish on it. All this stuff gets collected and gets goes back to the paper world and the cardboard world. We never get the same quality again. It'll never be as bright because of the ink. You know, we just can't do that. We don't want to use bleach or other chemicals in there, right? So we actually come out with a perfectly serviceable paper, but it's down the ladder one rung or two. So we're downcycling all the time. In nature, if we build as nature builds, there is extra material that is produced, that is around. Whatever nature is doing, there's extra material. And it's not that material is waste. There are niche organisms that use it as a resource, whether it's food or shelter or whatever. So this is what we have to do. When we build a house and we have wood shavings, I mean, wood shavings should go to the pulp mill. You know, there are things, anything but in the landfill, or use it in part of a compost mix. There are many things that we could do, but it will make our lives more labor intensive, but it will also make our lives far more richer and far more meaningful. And that's the thing that at the bottom we have to understand. It's trading, you know, so we have all these electric widgets. We don't have to know anything anymore. We don't have to work anymore. So we're free to sit in front of an electronic widget and have junk wash over us, right? What kind of life is that? I think we have to understand fundamentally that our culture is just on this spiral going down. And if we don't make changes there, I don't think we'll solve the energy problem or the waste problem.
Yes.
And is it still ongoing, Gordy, in every October, Columbus Day? It's not anymore. But for 14 years, we had the annual solar house tour, right? And it was the largest coordinated event in the United States, because this occurred in every community all across the United States on that weekend. So we don't have this anymore, but there are such a...
Might it come back?
It may be. We could be the seed right here in this room. I don't know. We could, they're fine. There we go. So there are such buildings. It's just a matter of contacting the owners, and which is no small matter. Gordian did this for many years. It's a lot of work involved in doing the coordination. But nonetheless, the buildings are there to see. there are many such buildings on Long Island and many in our own community right around here. And I'm proud to say that we are responsible for some of them anyway, you know. So we just have to organize that. I know one more question here. I promote solar, I promote supply solutions last. The first thing I emphasize is conservation. And we look at controlling the loads. It's called the demand side approach. I look at the cultural factors, as you can hear, our little office emblem with the Leonardo man there, talks about socioeconomic issues. These are the things that we talk about because I know not many other people are talking about it, so I feel I'm obligated to do it. There are a lot of people out there who will sell you and promote solar devices. Again, it falls into the widget category in my mind. But yes, after all the homework, all the hard stuff and the important stuff is done, sure, please put solar on your house. We're going to have to change this society from central production of electrical power to distributed production of electrical power. So we all have to get in on this together.
And it's changing a lot too, the technology, just like LED light bulbs, for example, which change every month. Mm-hmm. Solar technology is changing a lot now too, and I just heard the other night that there's solar films which are relatively transparent now, so they're actually putting them in sails of boats, so they're going to be e-boats, sailboats, so that they generate all their own. Won't be I don't know if there'll be an engine, but there's all that area that can be solar on a boat, but not just there. I mean, if you have solar films that are flexible like that,